Hey, Business of Biotechers, this is Matt Pillar. And before we jump into today's episode, I have a big special announcement. On Monday, November 13th at 11 a.m. Eastern, we're taking the Business of Biotech live for a 1-hour, highly interactive web conversation with a special guest you won't want to miss. I'm planning a good 30-minute grilling of Blue Sphere Bio CEO and biotech legal expert, Keir Loiacono, on legal and IP protection considerations for new and emerging biotechs. Keir is an Esquire and a veteran biotech attorney turned CEO with a ton of experience. And when I'm done with him, I'll turn him over to a select group of viewers, you Business of Biotechers, who will have the benefit of 30 minutes of face-to-face Q&A and interaction with Keir and other members of the call. This hour will be incredibly consultative and offer great value at no cost but your time. And it's an opportunity for some face-to-face virtual networking with fellow Business of Biotech listeners who just so happen to be the coolest cats in the business. Go to the link in the show notes of today's episode to register, and I'll see you there. Back in October 2021, on episode 65, we enjoyed a conversation with Forge Biologics co-founder, president, and CEO Tim Miller. That conversation focused on the growing biotech's effort to balance demand for its CDMO services with development of its own internal pipeline of candidates for infantile Krabbe and rare monogenic diseases. Since then, the company's CDMO services business has exploded to the point that it's now a global leader in outsourced gene therapy manufacturing. One of its clients, a biotech called Ray Therapeutics that's developing optogenetic therapies for a range of degenerative retinal diseases, was also featured on this podcast when Ray co-founder and CEO Paul Bresky joined me last October on episode 119. This episode is special because we're bringing Ray Therapeutics and Forge Biologics back, this time together for an introspective dive into the genesis and continuity of the sponsor-outsourcer relationship. I think it'll prove educational for any biotech seeking to create outsourcing success from the outset. I'm Matt Pillar. This is the Business of Biotech. And joining me from San Francisco is Jenny Holt, Chief Development Officer at Ray Therapeutics. And from right down the road, so to speak, maybe the other corner of the state in Philly is John Maslowski, Chief Commercial Officer at Forge Biologics. Jenny and John, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Matt. It's great to be here.
Yeah, Matt, thanks for having us. We appreciate it.
It's great to have you both. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. John, I said the opposite corner of the state. I'm up in Erie. But you just told me moments ago that you moved. Are you still in Philly?
I am. Just another area outside the suburbs of Philly. But still here, still an Eagles fan, so can't leave the area.
All right. Well, I grew up in Buffalo. I'm a Bills fan, so
sounds good.
Yeah. I had it just sounds good. We'll leave it at that.
They'll have a great year. Great quarterback.
John, I had like I said, I had Tim Miller on the show way back in the early days, episode 65. That was early days for the podcast, and I really enjoyed the conversation with him. The company has grown so explosively since then. He's a fantastic leader, and I'm thrilled to have Forge back on. We typically don't have outsourced partners. You're sort of a member of the supplier vendor community to us, and we focus on biotech execs. So. One, feel privileged, feel honored that I'm having you on the show.
Of course. Thank you.
But I'm curious if you could just share a little bit about, what you do for Tim and Forge, and a little bit on your background so we can set up the gist of the convo.
Sure. It's interesting. Tim and I go back a ways. We were both CEOs of company working actually in the same disease space, in epidermolysis bullosa. He was at Abeona Therapeutics, myself, CEO at FiberCell Science here in the Philadelphia region, and but was able to develop a mutual respect and also a drive to create multiple options for patients. So we thought best to have all these drugs on the market so they can all access them and treat their care as much as they need to. Mm-hmm. That mutual admiration turned into an opportunity to work together. And I being in the cell and gene space for about 18 years now. I go quite a ways back, and I'm also on the board of the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine as well. We track and really advocate for the space globally. Manufacturing, of course, will continue to be one of the sort of ongoing needs that will continue to grow and evolve, and with such complex processes, having experts centralized in a way that can help growing biotechs actually advance their programs really is of benefit. So to me, being asked to come in and run what is essentially the commercial role of running not only sales and marketing more in a classical sense, but also the client relationship. So our client resource group will actually work directly with groups like Ray Therapeutics and help them, not only keep them up to date in advances of their program, but also answer questions, interact, work very collaboratively together. That also falls within our commercial group as well. So I have the lucky benefit of not only being part of Forge, but also getting to touch on all these wonderful advanced therapeutics that are coming through our shop and seeing them come to fruition. So.
Yeah, very nice. Well, I think that we'll have a nice illustration of that role as we discuss what you're doing for and with Ray, with Jenny. But Jenny, on to you. As I mentioned, I had Paul on the show. I don't know, 119. I think I said it was. I had him and Dima Kuzmin, who's a managing partner for one of your lead investors. That episode is one of my all-time favorites for a couple of reasons. One, because Paul is just an amazing man with a super inspiring story. And I just really, really appreciated his transparency. But also selfishly, because that episode lit up the scoreboard, man, that episode has done so well for us. It really resonated. And that's one of the reasons I'm excited about this episode, because it's going to follow a similar format. We, in that episode, we had Paul and Dima on talking about their relationship, sort of that ecosystem of biopharma and investor. And here we're, kind of having the same format in the discussion around biopharma and outsourcer. So Ray's a great company. Paul made that very clear. Super exciting place to be. How did you end up there, and what are you doing there?
Right. So good question. I was fortunate enough to be introduced to Paul Bresky a few years ago. A good year or two before I even joined. I was aware of what he had been working on prior to Ray. And then I met him as Ray Therapeutics was just getting going. In my background, I have over 25 years in gene therapy, and worked everything from biotech to big pharma. I worked as a scientist for a good chunk of my career. And then I went into the management side, program management, alliance management, and I'd worked at a few startups. So I became aware that Paul needed a project manager. We do have a grant with CIRM, and that is a requirement. And we have a great relationship with CIRM. And he suddenly he needed somebody, and it was a good time for me. I was at 40 Molecular Therapeutics, another AAV gene therapy based company, phenomenal company. Loved my time there. But I do love that startup environment. And Paul is so inspiring that I thought, I think I can really help here and really help get this company off the ground, and working with Paul. And yet I became soon after the chief development officer. It's more recent. After going through a Series A raise. Mm-hmm. And we're fortunate enough to raise $100 million. I became chief development officer. And so now I work closely with Paul and our chief medical officer, Peter Francis, and of course the entire team, just to help monitor everything that goes on at the company. Timeline, budget, activities, anything and everything. So I'm really enjoying it. And Paul is inspiring, and his story and the patient perspective is on our minds every day. Definitely.
Yeah. Yes, I believe every word of that. And let that be a warning to chief development officers and small biotechs. You're going to wear a lot of hats, right? Overseeing, Jenny says, everything. Jenny, when you joined, how long has it been? How long did you say you've been there?
About a year and a half.
Year and a half. Yeah. So when you joined a year and a half ago, was the relationship with Forge as an outsourcing partner already established?
It was already established. And happily, I was very happy to learn about how they met, what work planned, what was already done, and stepped in and really become the managing person on behalf of Ray, working with Forge. So yes, was already established, which
John,
thumbs up.
With a big thumbs up. That's good. You guys don't have to cheerlead for one another so blatantly here. Okay. John, were you with Forge when the relationship was established?
Yeah, I was, Matt. I was there I've been there about 2.5 years now. After the sale of my last business, and was here for the startup of the Ray deal. And it's through a series of introductions through consultants, but also conferences. We have the opportunity to market widely and use a lot of our mechanisms, including Marina, who you've met earlier, and the rest of my marketing group to really get to meet these qualified leads. And Ray was one that's come through with a lot of wonderful feedback about their technology, about their target audience for patients. And so for us, it was a wonderful, intriguing project to hope to take on. So
tell me about the courtship. Were you courting Ray, or did Ray come looking to you?
Oh, I think that those things tend to be a bit mutual. We, of course, as a provider, you talk to mostly to development companies. Our goal is to show that we have the right stuff, right? We want to make sure they know that they don't come to a CDMO and bring their projects and sort of hope we know what we're doing, right? And I've in my past, being on the development sides, I've luckily got to be on both sides on the fence, know that when you go to a CDMO and you end up teaching that CDMO more than you're actually getting service from, it's a very frustrating place to be in a group who really needs, time on their side. They have cash burn, they've got a board, and they also have patients who are very, have been waiting a long time for relief. And so with that in hand, you want to make sure you're working with the right people and that you also have a platform to get you there quickly. So we endeavor to show that not only just meet the commercial team, but meet Dr. David Dismuke, our chief scientific officer, our chief technical officer, and the rest of our team will actually be the technical leads working in our true AAV experts in their field. I think that, that to us is how we would try to go to Ray and say, hey, look at what we have. Come see our facility. Make sure you're comfortable and that you trust us as a partner. So,
Jenny, you said that when you joined, when you joined Ray, the relationship had already been established, but you gave it a thumbs up. You were approving of the already established relationship. Why?
Well, one of the first things I asked is like, well, how did we choose Forge? What what am I adopting here? And Paul, one of the first things he did at the start of Ray was have the project of choosing a CDMO. And they, Ray Therapeutics, they hired a consultant and did a very rigorous landscape analysis, looked at a number of CDMOs to determine who was the right fit for us. And as John said, who had the right stuff. And that became Forge. And so that was, learning that, put me at ease. And as also John mentioned, the technical expertise was a big one. David Dismuke's not only AAV experience, but he actually has some background in optogenetics, and we're an optogenetics company.
I was going to ask that, like the optogenetic, you're like the right stuff, John, it's a catchy thing to say, but that stuff, the right stuff is a lot different to a lot of different people, right?
That's exactly right.
And Ray's therapeutic approach is complex, and it's niche, right? Optogenetics is a niche space. So Jenny, like you said, there was a guy there that had some optogenetics experience.
Yes. And obviously good AAV expertise, David Dismuke, and we also found that the Forge team has a lot of technical expertise. We were at that point, especially a very small company, and we needed a CDMO that could provide more technical expertise than just, as John mentioned, us doing it for a CDMO. We wanted this to be a partnership, not just, hey, make this for us. We wanted more of that collaborative partnership style, not just a provider. And that was also what we established with Forge. And that was important to us as well.
Yeah. Not that I expect you to name names, Jenny. I wouldn't ask you to do that. I don't want to push you outside of the comfort zone, obviously. But do you have any sense of like what that the consultation engagement that led you to Forge as a candidate, and sort of the, I don't know, I guess sort of the criteria that knocked some of the other folks out. Maybe there's some color on that.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a number of CDMOs looked at, and not only technical expertise. Obviously, you have to have a fit with your timeline, the scale that you need, project costs. It has to be a fit into where we were and are, and and also looking at Forge, it was very important. There's a low turnover rate there, so who we work with, we still work with. This is a well-established company that with solid technical expertise, and the people stayed, and the company had good funding. There's also a lot of new CDMOs popping up that don't make it, and then that's a risk for your project. And Forge had good funding and was established, and so it just kept checking off all the boxes as we were comparing them to others.
I find it really it boggles my mind to hear you say that there are like a lot of new CDMOs popping up who don't make it, when the first part doesn't boggle my mind at all. Like these press releases cross my desk at a rapid clip, like the cadence of new CDMO facilities. It's mind-boggling, and the money going into them. But I also, this is the space I cover, emerging biopharma, and I interview hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of execs of emerging biopharmaceutical companies who outsource their development and manufacturing. I mean, how can you not make it in this space? Forge, when I talked to Forge a couple of years ago, they were already big and growing. And I mean, the success has been rapid there. It's just like, how do you not make it? Like, I don't know. I don't know if I'm asking you that question like rhetorically.
Yeah. It's sometimes it's an important question too, because there's clearly a gap. I think we did an analysis once, Matt. We looked at like, what's the total available bioreactor size that we know of publicly that's in the world, or at least in the US too. And what's the need? Like, you look at need, like, let's look at the volume of clinical trials in cell and gene therapy. ARM reports on them every year. They're growing. I think year over year was 11%, that was reported previously. And I've seen numbers ranging, quite a bit. Between that growth and then the turnover for commercialization. So, luckily we are continuing to see the agency approving more cell and gene therapy products, and that reimbursement is occurring, and getting through payers. So as this sort of acceptance grows, so does the manufacturing requirement. So to your point, it sounds like every liter, every cell stack, every cell factory, everything should count. But then it comes back to, I think, what Jenny and I were sort of talking about is, is the right team in place? Do they have the expertise to actually carry them along? I'll give you, for instance, like we have our own regulatory support as well. Some clients, when they're very small, struggle to navigate the CMC field with the agency. It's sort of, it's ever changing. So our head of regulatory, Chris Schilling, was with Nationwide for many years, and saw dozens of INDs, including those for recently approved drugs. So that expertise, I think, is what will centralize a lot of the companies to come towards, and maybe consolidate some of that manufacturing. But it's difficult to get that team together and be properly funded, because it is a lot of capital, right, to build a facility and build the infrastructure and do it correctly and qualify it. I think a lot of people forget about qualification and validation. That's a big lift, and I think that's where some of the differentiation occurs when you're selecting. So,
yeah. Jenny, I want to ask you a follow up on something that you mentioned just a couple minutes ago. Among the boxes that you mentioned that Ray was looking to check were timeline, scale up, and cost, and those three things. I hear from my vantage point, spending a lot of time talking with the leaders of emerging biopharma companies. Well, I should say when everyone was flush with cash, pre-COVID, coming into COVID, like when COVID was just money everywhere. Cost, it was expensive, and people talked about the expense, but it was sort of not as big a factor as timelines. And then I would say scale up might have been a close second, right? The ability to scale. I guess just give me some color on what you're seeing now, Jenny, from like what you're seeing in terms of timelines and what a company like Ray's expectations are. I liken it to, this is a very bad, my wife tells me I'm terrible at analogies all the time, so I'm going to put that on full display right now. It's kind of like an outsource. A CDMO is like a mom or a dad who has 47 children, and they're all clamoring for that same amount of, for a finite amount of time, a finite amount of like resource of attention. And that if dad doesn't have a partner or whatever, like it's tough, right? Like it's tough. Yeah, I proved it. It's a bad analogy.
You know what you meant. Point, though. I think we know what you meant, though. So that's a good
You get
sign.
my point, Jenny. Yeah, like what's acceptable? Like what's acceptable? You don't have to give me specific numbers, but like how do you kind of suss that out, knowing that everyone's struggling for attention from the outsourcing community right now?
Yeah. If I understand the analogy and the question correctly,
good luck.
Maybe I'll just come up with something totally off the wall. I don't know. But I have a big background in program management, and there's always that, I think they call it the golden triangle, where you balance quality, time, and cost. And you have to decide, what are you giving on, what's flexed. If one side of the triangle changes, so do the others. So it's a constant balance. And we have to decide what's most important to us. Now, obviously, GMP manufacturing, going to the clinic, quality is not something you can cut corners. This is going to treat patients. So then you're balancing, okay, timeline, budget. So we have worked really closely with Forge, like, telling them, our goals to get to clinic, and worked with them on how to reach those goals. And always balancing budget, but if we have changed the budget here and there as we go in order to hit all the other goals, but working together as a team to have those discussions and make sure we keep that quality in mind, as well as appropriate timeline for Ray Therapeutics as a company. It's a constant balance and a constant conversation, actually.
Yeah, I've got a question for you on that constant conversation and sort of how that plays out in real time. But one more quick follow-up before we get to that one. I was in Boston a couple of weeks ago it was during a biotech week in Boston, and I went out there and recorded some podcasts with a few execs at their HQs. And in a couple of those conversations, we were talking about how like the BPI show was going on. It's like a I'm not sure if Forge was there or not. I'm not sure if I saw Forge there or not.
And we had some of our team there. Yeah,
I'm sure. Yeah. I mean, among other CDMOs, and obviously it's a tech centric sort of vendor driven supplier side show. But we were talking. I talked with a couple of these execs about like the difference in the difference, like the change from like sales engagement with an outsourcing BD, business development rep, through contracting to execution, like were during that process, like things can often go like, here's where we were during the sales process. Here's where we are now. And it doesn't align. Like it's not, what was promised isn't necessarily there. Now, Jenny, I know you weren't there probably during the contracting phase. But so John, I'll let you kind of comment on that. Like in your experience, having worked on the other side as well, right? Having worked as a biopharma exec, what are some common areas of failure between the pitch, the contract, and the beginning of the execution of the relationship?
Yeah, and I think to your point, Matt, this is something at Forge we were very careful with, because I very well said that in my past experiences, that continuity sometimes is a bit incomplete. It's sort of what you were promised versus what you're supposed to sign against, and really what do they look like. We did it a little differently at Forge in our past of our experiences, where couple things. The same people tend to be involved the entire process. I've had experiences where you talk to a client development rep, and then you're moved to legal, and then you're moved to contracting, and now you're on your sixth or seventh contact, and it's whispered down the lane. All your terms are starting to get a little muddy, right? Mm-hmm. So what we purposely do at Forge is we've established a couple sub teams that all work with that client through the entire process. It's generally a client development, representative, which is, the sort of the folks who are out there making the relationships and spreading the sort of Forge story. But we also carry a technical sales group. And why we do that, these are, AAV scientists who work exclusively on the sales side to act as almost like an MSL, if you're talking about in the classical pharmaceutical drug sales term, to help partner with that, client development rep and, explain the technical parts of the process. So we're not pulling all of our process development people off the floor every day. They're actually scientists who are trained in that area and can move ahead. And then it moves into client relations who are also involved early. So that whole process is seamless in that, it's the same team. We're keeping in contact so there's a clear understanding of transparency with the client. We also provide technical questionnaires and meetings, so we make sure we're actually creating the right program. What is your serotype? What sort of comp is it? Is it single-stranded or self-comp? What's your target titer goals? What's your route of administration even, just because we want to make sure we're fashioning the right product profile for that particular program. I think if that's done piecemeal along the way, you lose that traction. And at the end, you end up sort of different street from where you started your journey. So, one of the goals we have is let's eliminate a lot of that noise and try to keep it seamless with the same group.
Yeah. God, your analogies are better than mine. They're so concise. They're tight. They're tight and they're concise.
No, I appreciate that. It's a hobby of mine, so I appreciate that.
I need to polish that hobby up a little bit. So the day I want to get into some conversation around sort of the daily and common nurturing and maintenance of execution, right? So maybe let's make that give some personal perspective on that. John, when did you meet? Well, first, let me ask you this. Are you two, John, are you the primary caregiver to the Ray relationship?
Yeah, it's so my team I have really will spend their day to day, and weeks to weeks with Jenny and her team. So I sort of alluded to before, we have a client relations team. Now, I think this is an important point and maybe good advice to other CDMOs. And I know a bunch who do this as well, but I see it missing sometimes, where there's not sort of that, that concierge approach of this is the person to come to who will coordinate and be your internal advocate in Forge. And that's what this client relations group's job is to do, is to make sure if Jenny needs something, they get on the phone right away. They make sure that we pull the right team together. We're answering questions. We're working through a scientific, sort of puzzle together, and we make sure that advances properly. So that is, I think that approach is very important. To keep a sort of transparent and honest relationship through the process.
Yeah. And Jenny, you are the overseer and sort of the day-to-day leader of the relationship from the Ray side.
Yes. And we recently brought on a vice president of CMC, Jared Denham. So the team on the Ray side is growing, but I am on every interaction with Forge, and including the weekly calls with the client relations manager and team, technical team, project manager. Yes.
So that's weekly. Yeah. That's where I was going to go next. When did you two first interact with one another? When did you meet?
Oh, when Jenny joined. So maybe, and Matt, maybe, to sort of add to the story of our interactions, because, I think you're going down the right line of questioning, is really what is that sort of relationship? And although they're routine, sort of discussions occur at on a daily level, there's also access to Tim and I and to David. We're on a lot of these calls as well. And that's also important too, because we need to, we want to make sure that, Jenny and Paul and everybody on the team and Peter really are heard, and that they're making sure they're having their right sort of, questions answered, but not only that we're meeting their sort of timelines and needs. Because we've all been on that other side of, there's a study starting. We have to make sure you have delivery. And so I think it's important for groups to not get overly regimented about here's your manager, good luck. It's really, you really do need a broader personalized relationship. We tried to do that. So Jen and I met when she joined, and we've seen each other at conferences, playing just at ASGCT recently. And I don't know, Jenny, if you'll be at the Med meeting or the Mesa meeting next week, but we'll both be there, and I'm sure we'll catch up there as well.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
This podcast will air after the meeting on the Mesa. Just for reference, just as our audience is aware, like if you're planning on going to the meeting, you're listening to this right now and you're planning on going to the meeting on the Mesa, you're going to need to do that in 2024. Just keep things clear.
And Jenny, a great week. Yeah.
Jenny, I don't know if you caught it, but John just affirmed that I'm going down the right line of questioning, which is very important to me, given that this is my podcast. Of course, I'm going down the right line of questioning. I go down any line of questioning I want. Sometimes it's a completely, errant line, but tell me about those. Tell me about those weekly meetings. What are you what are you doing? Like, what are you doing in those meetings, Jenny?
Yeah.
Like, what do you need to come away from those meetings with?
Variety of things. So they're weekly, and it's with the client relations manager, project manager, and the technical team. We usually establish an agenda in advance on, what are the important topics to hit. Sometimes it is, I want to go over the contract again, or our timelines are down to, we want to go over this technical step. We want to, and it's usually an update on status. It's a very mutual building of the agenda, and a lot of back and forth from both of us. And so that's weekly, and it keeps us up to speed. And then, as needed, there's ad hoc follow-up if we run out of time or have more questions, or obviously email follow-up. I feel like the team is accessible to me anytime it's needed. Even sometimes I'm like, I can't remember what did we talk about with this, and I'll just email and say, I'm so sorry, I can't find my note. Can you remind me of what, and they get right back to me within a business day, which is pretty rare for a CDMO, to be that communicative. And as John mentioned, I've also had a lot of interaction with John and with the CTO, David Dismuke. They're also there for us anytime, which is also rare. It's not going above the team's head. It's just sometimes you want to get a different perspective or just have a discussion, and a very very professional group.
Working together is key to meeting Biopharma's goals, especially as the development of new drugs and delivery methods continue to advance human health. Join us each week as we discuss the changing landscape of biologics manufacturing and how you can meet your need for speed, efficiency, and flexibility. The pod is brought to you in collaboration with Cytiva, a global provider of technologies and services that advance and accelerate the development, manufacture, and delivery of therapeutics. Check out their resources at cytiva.com/emerging biotech. That's CYTIVA.com/emerging biotech. John, I'm not going to ask you. The first question that popped in my head listening to Jenny's response for you was, how does Forge enable that level of attentiveness? I'm not going to ask you that question because it's going to give you too easy it's a softball, and it's.
I have an answer if you'd like to hear it, but no, I'm happy to hear another question. I'm
going to twist the question a sort of a different way to make it not give you an opportunity to commercialize, but sure. Give you an opportunity to instruct our listeners. If I'm a preclinical biopharmaceutical company, and I'm looking to test that accessibility among a group of CDMOs, the accessibility that Jenny just described, which is fantastic, details, very specific. How do I test that? How do I test that out with a number of potential CDMOs to feel like I'm ensured that I'm going to have that access going in?
Yeah. Here's a good way. And I think you're right. I think it's also about a little bit about how you conduct your diligence on your CDMOs. You should, and everyone should always look at multiple CDMOs and make sure they have the right fit and the right interaction with your team. But I think the way, and this may be a little bit of my past activity, when I was doing my own searches, but we see a lot of clients do this, is visit them, like physically visit them. And if you can get a visit and get a tour, that's a good start. There actually are CDMOs that won't do that. They say, We don't give tours, or, we can show you a video of our facility. And upon that visit, who actually attends your meetings? Who comes in and says hello and actually walks you through these sections. And I can tell you that David, myself are very common features in those intro meetings. And we do that. There's a reason for it too. We want to show that we're committed, and also to show that Forge is sustainable, and come and see who's leading Forge, and come see it's a sustainable business, and give you some comfort, new potential client. You deserve that coming in here, even if you're a seed round group with great tech and still waiting on your Series A, but you want to start with some early research work. They should receive the same service, in our opinion. So the other way we sort of manage it too is we're very careful not to overload our teams. And by that, I mean, you have to carry so many representatives, there should be a threshold that representative actually sort of manages, right? Mm-hmm. So, you don't want a client relations manager who has 30 clients all in GMP runs, right? How do you white glove a service like that? You just can't. Yeah. Right. So we're very careful with our hiring. We obviously don't overhire, but we want to also make sure that we keep our touch points very personal. So we actually monitor these actual numbers and make sure we're maintaining them through the sort of life cycle of our clients' work.
Yeah. Yeah. Jenny, it's been sunshine and roses, the conversation so far, and that's fantastic and specific. Like I appreciate the fact that neither of you are dishing me platitudes. You give me specific examples, but surely bumps in the road come along. So how do you give us some flavor on how you guys work together to tackle challenges that you might face, like maybe some of the unforeseen, and then work collaboratively to fix those challenges.
Yeah. Well, as you know, drug development, I think especially gene therapy drug development in all its functions is difficult, and there can be challenges. That is unfortunately normal. It's not an easy job. Mm-hmm. If there's any challenges on the manufacturing side, we always grab onto Forge's technical experts first. And I have the technical experts I speak to on a weekly basis, but they will then, and the client relations manager will go grab additional technical experts as needed if there's something we really need to discuss. And what's the next best step? What is that next best step? And sometimes then David Dismuke gets his input. And so that's usually the approach. We have to take a holistic look at, what's the challenge, what's the technical aspects, what are the options, and then take it internally and go, okay, what's the best choice for Ray Therapeutics? What's that best choice next step? And what are the risks? And so that's usually our approach, and with, working with Forge on that.
Yeah. I mean, I guess if I flip that question around, I mean, in any, for any outsource manufacturer, you probably face client challenges as well. Like clients may create challenges for Forge at times, right, John? So, I mean, not that I'm using Ray as an example. I'm sure
it's not Ray, but
no, we're perfect.
Okay.
We're perfect.
Yes,
exactly.
Sure. I'm sure. John, I'd welcome you to give me a little bit of color on that, though. Like, I mean, the manufacturing challenges can come from all sorts of different places. To Jenny's point, this is not an easy space. So what's sort of the default position at Forge around, like, okay, when something goes unexpectedly or when we have a problem that we're having trouble solving, here's our de facto approach?
Yeah, I'll give you a sort of a two-tiered answer. One is we actually carry our own molecular development group. So by that, I mean, these are molecular PhD scientists who can actually evaluate sequences and determine if we actually see potential pitfalls prior to even producing, scale up plasmids to even make AAV. So we offer this as a service to our clients. We actually sometimes do this work also to make sure, is there anything here that we can see that might cause problems down the road, right? So I like it because it's a more of a proactive approach to a program that can cut time up front, even though you may spend a little time going through some upfront evaluations. So we think that helps with success rate. But to your good point too, with all the variability of sizes of genes of interest and serotypes, obviously there's variability where, if we have issues arise, Jenny sort of alluded to it, but when we find things, if we were to find something, there's a triage task force that comes and looks at this with our experts. And what I think is important is to come to the client with actual ideas, walking to a meeting, go, uh-oh, we got a problem. Good luck. Or, what do you think? I think that comes across a little bit naive if you're a self-touted CDMO manufacturing expert and you go into the client with no answer, not even an option. So, what we like to do is at least create a few options, knowing that every client has a different level of sort of flexibility. Some would rather go back and do more characterization work. Some just wants to move ahead as quickly as possible. So we try to come up with solutions that, sort of meet both ideas or, whatever is custom fit to the client. But we do think it's important to make sure we're at that meeting with actual data and sort of the path of the idea that's been sort of stamped by our leadership, including David and folks. So,
yeah, very good. Jenny, how do you measure success at the end of the day? I mean, if I know Paul wouldn't do this because Paul, it's just not in his nature. I'm sure he's capable of having the hard conversation. But at the end of the day, like he could walk into your office and be like, I need you, Jenny, to hand me a report that is proving the value of the money we're spending on Forge Biologics. I need success metrics in my hands because I have to turn around and go to the board and justify all this money that we're spending in this engagement. Now, I'm not going to ask you to give me that report right now. But maybe the Cliff's notes, like if Paul did demand such a report, how would you go about sort of measuring or quantifying the success of your project?
That's a great question. Pretty easy to answer, I believe, because we do have a number of contracts and activities with Forge, and some of which we've completed some of those activities and actually have closed out and completed some contracts. So for me, it's, well, here was our original budget and timeline. Here's where we landed. Were we on time? We're on budget. And what was a deliverable? And so for me, it's, it would just be summarizing that and showing, what value we got out of the money spent, in that way. And then what's next? And of course, a lot of budgets, you do some prepaids and, okay, here's what we're working on now. Here's what's next. And that is how we'll measure success of that next deliverable. So it's actually pretty easy. It'd be more of a, I think in tables and bullet points, I'd probably put a table together and show, we contracted for this. This is when it was delivered. This is what was the deliverable compared to what the original request was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Does thought go into like a company like Ray and you're assessing potential outsourcing partners? Does thought go into like how far downfield this partner will be able to help you get the ball? So for instance, Ray is early, right? Like you're not like, do you have a phase 1 clinical candidate quite yet?
Yes.
Yes.
We have a candidate. We're not in the clinic yet, but we have our clinical candidate.
Yeah. So does thought go into like, okay, if we sign on with Forge, like, and things go swimmingly as we anticipate they will with our candidate, based on the science that we know, we're confident Forge is going to be able to take us like all the way through clinical supply, for instance, or what's sort of the thought process there?
Exactly that. And we do discuss that with Forge already. We have we're in the process of getting our first trial open, phase 1. And so it's what do we need for that? And then what's next? And towards commercial, we think far ahead. We want to plan for commercial early, and we've already have with Forge, establishing what we are doing with Forge now can pivot to commercial. And as well as we're starting US-based clinical trials, but also we've been discussing with Forge their capabilities to release for EU. So those are important conversations, and we confirm things with Forge and make sure, like, are we going to be able to move all through trials and into other countries with Forge? And I think the answer is yes.
Yeah. Yeah, very good. John, as it relates to those things, give us some, again, put your C-level biopharma hat on, harken back to those days, and now having the experience at Forge, because I know you're going to tell me, like, yeah, the capabilities are all there, which is great. But what questions to validate the things that Jenny just talked about? What questions should new biotechs be asking?
Yeah, and I think they're important ones, Matt. The really the sort of where Jenny's alluding to sort of the end-to-end capabilities, and I know sounds like that now I'm selling again for Forge, but
like I said, I mean, you pose it in the context of, like, these are the things you should be looking for.
And precisely. And I think one thing, and having done this in my past as well, keep referring to some of the things I've seen. There's a lot of regulatory risk in actually moving products around through its life cycle, right? Mm-hmm. Comparability is very difficult. You're lucky if you can do analytical. Once you're starting clinical trials, and now talking about the potential to have the need for clinical comparability, especially if you're in pivotal trials. That becomes a challenge on a program that really, is on a delivery timeline and can add a lot of time. And not only that, you're dealing with licensing of cell lines and materials and things that you may have had at university. Now you're bringing to an industrial CDMO. So, one thing that, we always want to look for is how much can we do under one roof? So not only can we have that continuity from discovery through the clinical process for comparability, but also, how do we manage this? We're a small team. How many project managers do we need to look at? Who's doing analytical testing? Who's doing the actual manufacturing? Who's doing cold chain? And then I also have a CRO to take care of. And I also have, I have medical monitors and things like that. So it becomes a little bit of a corporate issue. How do we continue to manage? So that's why we've designed a little bit more of an under one roof approach. We also think it's a bit cost effective as well from a processing and an audit standpoint. Mm-hmm. So I think, for folks who are out there shopping at a CDMO, think about the sort of labor hours you're going to have to put in if you choose to take a more piecemeal approach. And then you have to hope they're all talking together. Hey, contract lab, my samples are on the way. Well, we missed them on the dock. They're going to get tested next week. Stability pool was missed because, we had 4 others that week that were from another client. These are sort of things you might want to think about when you're doing your actual selections and again, making sure they have the capabilities to go to commercial. Like when Jenny's also mentioning producing for Europe, you need a QP designation to do that. And, not only for the lots themselves, but the actual facility producing them. And, have you properly scaled up to a late stage commercial design for your airflows and your clean room designs and everything. So I think that's all, take a look at all those aspects prior to making any decisions. Because what you don't want to do somewhere is have to start contemplating an expensive move that can cause a big delay.
Yeah. And I've got a question around that too. And I know we're getting a bit short on time. You guys okay for a few more?
Sure, for me.
Yeah. Okay, good deal. Yeah. Jenny, you mentioned when I put you on the spot and asked you how you would respond to a Paul Bresky grilling about your investment in Forge. You mentioned some completed contracts. Can you kind of I guess briefly take us through or give us some color on what your outsourced partner has helped you sort of achieve to this point, sort of project outcomes, like how maybe how far you've been able to move the ball downfield preparing for phase 1 that you otherwise may not have without the right partner.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. We really partnered up with Forge and contracted soups to nuts manufacturing. We have completed our master cell banks, plasma manufacturing, including GMP manufacturing of plasmas, which is great doing it under one roof because then, the plasma team and that deliverable is in touch with the GMP production team. And, you don't have to try to ship things around the country. It's all right there. And so we have completed those tasks, and in support of GMP production, we have completed a number of research production lots to support a number of non-clinical activities that we need moving towards our IND filing and clinic. And we have we're initiating our GMP manufacturing run. So that, that's the big one. And it's exciting that we've reached that point, and a lot of activity right now with the team on that. So I hope that answers your question. We're just really full bore ahead towards the clinic with Forge.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good. That question that I had that I just referenced, John said something about a move, the cost of a move. It's funny you should say that, because I've read a lot of research, some of it proprietary. Like I'd like to cite, but there's some proprietary research I've read. But even just the anecdotal sense that I get spending time talking with biopharma companies that outsource development manufacturing is that, like, once you're committed, they're loath to make a change. You commit a lot of time, energy, expense, intellect. It's not an insignificant endeavor to say, you know what, things aren't working out with Forge. Let's look at X, right? Like, it's not an insignificant. Nobody wants to do that, for understandable reasons. But there's got to be times where it's justifiable. I mean, people are forced to do it. What is, like, if I'm in a bad relationship and things aren't working out, what's justifiable? What's considered cause for a switch? Jenny, I want your perspective on this first. Like, what would be considered cause for a change in your CDMO selection?
Yes. I mean, if they weren't able to have a process that supports a pivotal trial or a commercial process. I mean, some CDMOs don't. They really are early phase only. So you have to plan that switch early on in that tech transfer. So that is definitely justifiable. And of course, I've seen switches happen because, not enough communication, the activities and deliverables aren't happening, and you're getting delayed and more money spent, but you're not getting what you want. And as a company, you've got to work to hit your timeline. So those are hard decisions. I mean, it really has to go south to do that. But I've seen that happen with others. But for me, a more logical one is if they can't support your full clinical development program to commercial, you have to think early on when and how do we do the switch. And it's a big task.
Yeah, I can only imagine. John, I'm going to let you comment on that, but your comment cannot be what's justifiable, like what's cause for a switch if your CDMO's name doesn't start with an F and have Forge in the middle.
Or talk about how folks have switched to us, right? Maybe don't talk about that one either.
I mean, if you have specific examples of a previous CDMO's failure, like the specific failure causing the switch, this is what I want my listeners to come away with. Like, what are we looking out for that could go south?
Yeah, I think here's one. I think everything Jenny is talking about is usually a lot of the reasons. But one I'll add is, sometimes CDMOs run their business on who is their biggest clients. And sometimes those big clients start taking a lot of attention. And I've seen multiple and talking through networks, folks who had to walk from a CDMO strictly for lack of attention, which is why we were very careful about, I mentioned earlier about ratios of clients versus our client relations representatives. They look, they see a revenue source in their cases, and they're saying, well, we're going to divert our attention there, and we think that's got a high rate of success. Some of them track those types of clients very closely to actually look at their % chance of success, even on revenue, based on their clinical progress. And I think that's an unfortunate approach, because then you lose a lot of the innovation that's coming behind it. So, to add on to things like, lack of platform expansion, lack of ability to sort of, move to commercial, I also think you have to make sure they have the right mindset to see the sort of the long-term plan and really stick with you through that plan and work towards a commercial goal together. So,
yeah. Very good. Jenny, your thought on that?
I have to completely agree with your first comment, John, about the attention. Because in many of my past experience is that lack of attention from CDMOs who, especially small biotech, you may not be that important to them. And you feel that and it shows. And that's very difficult. And so I love that you guys have your business model to avoid that. So I was nodding because I totally agree that that's a huge one that I've seen again and again and again. Yeah. And sometimes you just have to leave. You have to leave that relationship. It's a bad relationship. You got to go somewhere else, and it's hard, but it definitely happens.
Yeah. All right. Like I said, we're running over here, which I could do. I could go another hour. You guys up for another hour? No, I'm just kidding. But I could. This has been super informative and enjoyable. You guys are both great. But we'll leave you with a tough one. Jenny, if you had a chance to have a redo, a mulligan, if you will, a do-over, a redo with something specific in terms of your outsourcing relationship, what would it be?
Oh, wow. That is a really big question.
I know. I'll put you on the spot with that one. Be honest. I know John's listening, but be honest. It's John's job to listen. So be honest.
It is his job to listen. No, I wouldn't change anything. Sometimes I personally just wish I had more time, because we are a small company, to spend more time with Forge for my own learnings. We trust them and their technical expertise so much. And that's why we've added on in our team a VP of CMC to help with Ray Therapeutics time, in that partnership. We have to spend our time as well. So I'm happy about that. But I wouldn't change anything on the work we have done and have planned with Forge. And I look forward to what those next steps are as we go into clinical development and planning those future needs with them.
That's that's fair. And probably a more fair way to answer the question, or to ask the question, that is, would be, you mentioned that you brought on a CMC resource that's engaged in the Forge relationship. Yeah. As you take next steps, maybe a more fair question would be like, what would you like next? Like, what would you like next in the progression of the relationship? Whether that's another resource at Ray on the CMC or quality side, or whether that's, I don't know, to be cloned because you need more time. Like, what would you like to see next?
A little bit of everything. Well, we have big milestones of getting to clinic, and we're as a company, very focused on that, including the successful release of our first GMP lot from Forge. And what I want to see next, is kind of get over that hump, but we're also, we need to start discussing what's next. And that's for me really important. We have a lot of plans. And if we're successful in our first phase 1, we have a lot of patients that we want to reach with these rare retina blinding diseases. So there's so much to do, and it's very much on my mind to have that time to spend those discussions and those discussions with Forge. So I don't know if that answers your question, but they're just, that's the focus, kind of get past where we are now for the next month or two, but we have to start planning that future out, in detail.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, John, I'll give you the option. You can either answer the question the way I asked the first or second of Jenny. You can either give me your thoughts on, like, if you had a redo to fix something or do something differently with the Ray Therapeutics relationship, what would it be? Or I'll let you off the hook and say, like, what would you like to see next?
I think, it's a good question.
John's going to answer both those questions. I know damn well he's going to answer both those questions.
It's probably going to be a hybrid answer. Yeah. But I am, unfortunately, there's not a lot of controversy with Ray, so I apologize in advance, but they're a wonderful client. They're intelligent. They know this business. So they're like our favorite kinds of clients to have. So we're sort of we're speaking to the choir with them. They know how to advance drugs. They know their targets or what they need to do. So it's a lot easier to be collaborative, but I'll speak more generally, that I would like to actually see more integration. I know I touched about this a little earlier, but, we do see groups who I think, have some raising and some interesting tech, but maybe aren't from our space. And I think are a lot larger gap of learning to let me give you for examples for the gap to what is really needed to create a preclinical study for a gene therapy candidate. What are the components taken there? What's biodistribution really about? And then really what are realistic sort of timing for clinical phases? Like if you come with me with the GOI and say you're going to be commercial in 2 years, we probably need a broader discussion. So what I think is if there's a bit of a way to meet with these teams early, speak more about the industry for the ones who are a little less sort of knowledgeable, and help them actually. Like, look, we're not trying to be an investment bank to help them do their raising, but we can give some advice about what that looks like. So when you go to pitch for Series A, it doesn't sound impossible, quite frankly. And also, I touched on molecular development. Luckily that's in place now. There are clients that would love to have that earlier, so they can actually benefit from some of the sequencing analysis or some of the early ideas to maybe cut down some of the early research work. But luckily that's in place now. And I've actually seen the impact on that in some clients who either had a very old sequence that they haven't, they've had in the sort of drawer for a while and they want to go back and look at it. Like, oh, by the way, there are some sequences here that may cause some issues for you, or maybe you may want to look at your ITRs or where you're actually positioning. So I think that what I'm trying to get to a little bit here is there ways to help clients be successful sooner, in their programs, and see the light. Don't lose a year. I've seen it, lose a year in funding. We all know there are great programs out there who just don't get to the finish line because of some of these things, and it's unfortunate for patients. So there's a way to sort of cut through some of that noise. I'd love to add that to their programs.
Yeah. Very thoughtful, thoughtful response. I appreciate that.
No,
I'm gonna let you both off the hook. I know there's more to be said, and I hope we have the opportunity to get to the more that's to be said, at a later date. But in the meantime, I'm going to let you off the hook, and I'm going to thank you both. You're both fantastic. I thought this was very valuable, engaging, and fun.
Agreed.
The same, Matt. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Yep. Likewise. Thank you. This was enjoyable. Let me know if you need a sequel.
Well, see, Jenny, the thing is, Jenny, you're invited to come back anytime. John has to have special permission. That initial recording I did with Tim, that was a long time ago, and we were focused, not largely, but we were mostly focused on your internal pipeline, which is sort of our role here with this,
Of course.
I'm just giving you a hard time. You guys,
we'll talk to Tim. We'll get Tim back with you, Matt, and you guys can get an update and see how things are moving on the pipeline side as well.
Yeah, so, I'd have a hard time saying no to that, guys. Very
sounds good.
Yeah. All right, guys. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks so much.
So that's Ray Therapeutics Chief Development Officer Jenny Holt and Forge Biologics Chief Commercial Officer John Maslowski. I'm Matt Pillar, and this is the Business of Biotech. We're produced by Bioprocess Online, the golden child of the Life Science Connect family, with support from Cytiva, which demonstrates, and he's laughing at me because I called us the golden child, which demonstrates its commitment to the new and emerging biopharma community at cytiva.com/emerging biotech. Check that out. Visit us at bioprocessonline.com for mountains of peer-generated content. Subscribe to this pod so you never miss an episode. And thanks for listening.